Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're refreshed, that you've used the opportunity to connect, and that you're raring to go. We have a couple of hours left, and we're going to move straight away to one of our first plenary sessions for this afternoon. It's Policy Pathfinding in the New Normal, and it's moderated by Francois Austin, who's the partner and global head of energy at Oliver & Wyman. Over to you, Francois, and I hope you have an excellent session.
The theme and the underlying kind of data behind today's conversation is really the work that's been done through the Energy Trilemma and the Energy Trilemma Index, which is an index that has been developed over the course of the last kind of 10 years. It's an index that looks at 128 countries. It looks at the interrelationship and the interplay between the themes of energy security, equity, and sustainability. And it's really a tool that is there to help countries to think about their energy policy and what they can do to create greater prosperity ultimately in those countries. The pandemic, as we are all aware, has had huge impacts and has no doubt accelerated the trends in a number of areas around the themes of sustainability, but I also think around the themes of security and kind of equity as well. And there is certainly going to have been, I think, though not in the 2020 index, but I'm sure we'll see in the 2021 index, some very significant changes as a result of the pandemic. We will talk today about a number of the countries, not just those that are at the top of the index, but also those that are improving and making significant steps forward from what might have been sort of lower positions on the index. We're very privileged to have an outstanding panel with us here today. I'll briefly introduce them and then I'll hand over to them to make some opening comments in a second. We have Javiera Aldunate, who is the Head of International Affairs Office for the Ministry of Energy in Chile. Welcome, Javiera. We have Sir Philip Lowe, who is the Executive Chair of the World Energy Trilemma and sits on the board of the World Energy Council. Welcome to you, Philip, as well. We have Professor Abu Sambo, who is the Chair and the Nigeria Member Committee of the World Energy Council. Welcome to you, Abu. And we have Martin Young, who's Senior Director of Insights at the World Energy Council. Welcome to you, Martin. The structure of the session is as follows. Martin is going to share with us a few slides and provide some context and perspective for us around the index. And then I will ask each of the panelists to share some opening thoughts, and then we'll engage in a question and answer session. There is a series of questions that I have, which I will go to the panelists with, but we encourage people from the audience to also sort of raise their questions. I will be able to see those questions on the chat box on Zoom, and I will be able to feed those questions into this session. So I think we should kick off. I should hand over to you, Martin. And let's start the session.
Thank you, Francois. So I'm now going to show some slides, and hopefully this is going to come up for everyone. I'm just going to quickly take you through some of the results, and just to say that we have launched the Trilemma today. It is on the Council's website, and the online tool is also available where you can see the individual country profiles for the 128 odd countries that we have in the Trilemma. So let me move forward. So this is our 10th anniversary of the Energy Trilemma. Francois has given a great opening view of what the Trilemma does, but what it tries to do is assess and score and rate the 130 odd countries on their energy policy performance. What we are trying to do is aim to facilitate a dialogue about improving energy policy. And we have the three dimensions that Francois mentioned. We have security, we have trying about the reliability of supply. We have equity, which is looking at access, affordability, and sustainability. So going on to the key important parts, looking now at the top 10 ranks. Now, This year, we have introduced a couple of new changes. In previous years, the trilemma was monochrome. We just had it in orange. Now we've gone to a more colorful presentation using different color for each of the 3 dimensions. Partly because it helps us differentiate between the countries more easily, but also because the transition is not going to be monochrome. The different places means countries are going to transition in very different ways. We've also included on the trilemma some dots, so you can see the range of the scores for the individual dimensions. So that gives an idea about the spread. And here in the top 10, you can actually see that the scores by the 3 dimensions are actually pretty close. Another new introduction this year was we have introduced tied rankings. So, and the reason we've done this is basically because some of the scores are actually equal. For example, Austria and Finland have exactly the same score. To try and differentiate them on ranking become a little bit arbitrary. So tied rankings have been introduced. It does also mean that we have a few more friends, which I think is always helpful. Looking at the top 10, there is very much, they're all OECD countries. And this really reflects the fact that those OECD countries have a very long-standing push about improving their energy policies. But as Francois has noted to begin with, we actually can learn not just from the top 10, but we can also learn from those who've made their improvements. So what I want to do here is highlight some of those countries who've made the biggest improvement since 2000. We've got the Trilemma dataset where we've gone back to 2000, and we've looked at all the different indicators that we have. We have some 70 odd indicators, and seen how the countries have improved. If I first highlight the dots on the individual dimensions, you can see now there's a greater diversity for these improvers. There has been substantial improvement, for example, the huge improvement by Cambodia, but it also illustrates here that there's still significant scope for further improvement. We can get more insight into how these countries have improved by if we start looking within the individual dimensions. So to begin with, if we look at the top 10 dimensions, the top rankings, and you can here immediately see the point I was referring to earlier about the need for the tied rankings. Energy equity is very skewed. This is because it looks at energy access. Following the UN Sustainability Development Goal 7, which energy access is binary, it's yes or no. So we have a lot of countries who are going towards 100% access, but it also includes cost. And so here we have on the energy equity, we have a split in the top 10 ranks between those countries with very competitive markets, but also the oil producing countries where there are lower costs. On security, we have, again, a lot of OECD countries, European countries, but also a number of producers with diverse resources, for example, like Brazil and Canada. And on sustainability, we have a lot of, it's made up of European and Latin American countries, particularly those who obviously have a focus on low carbon or renewable energy. Looking at the top 10 improvers by dimension brings some particularly interesting information. We can see here that over the last 20 years, the SDG 7 has been a huge catalyst for help for improving access. Massive improvements in countries like Mozambique and Cambodia. For security, there have been modest improvements, particularly where countries have diversified their energy resources. And for sustainability, there's a little bit more surprises. Some countries that ones might not envisage being in top 10 improvers, but frequently these can actually be countries where they've started off on a very low base, so some of the improvements can be quite large. But I'd also like to highlight in the top 10 improvers, China. People forget how 20 years ago, the state of Chinese energy system, and it's had a huge improvement during that time and massive economic growth at the same time. So I've taken you through the top 10s, and now as we have a panel with Javiera and Abu, I'm going to give you some quick highlights that I'm sure that my fellow panelists already know for Chile and for Nigeria. And you can see immediately why we were keen to have the new colouring of the trilemma triangles. Nigeria and Chile are both actually very similar on their score for energy security. Both have a B grading, but they are significantly different on equity and sustainability. If we look at the indices below, we can see how Chile has made good modest improvement across all three of the dimensions. Nigeria has made significant improvement on energy equity, but with the low score, clearly there's further scope for improvement. And on sustainability, there's been a small decline. I'd like to close with a quote that we have from this year's report from our Secretary General. And it's really about emphasizing the point here, how the trilemma is a tool that tries to help countries learn from and with each other so they can understand what policies may be appropriate, understands where those work in the different contexts, and generally so how we can help have an informed debate about improving energy policy. So, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. That's very interesting. I think sort of brings to life the trilemma and will enable us now to dive into the conversation. So what I'd like to start off is to give each of the panelists an opportunity to sort of make some opening kind of remarks, opening comments. And I'd like sort of to start with Philip. And it's really a similar question, which I'll ask of all of you, which is really, how can the trilemma help countries kind of to learn from each other? And any examples that you might have to bring this to life would be greatly appreciated. Philip. I think you're on mute at the moment. You're off mute now, Philip.
Thank you, Francois, and I'm very pleased to take part in this panel and the launch of this year's Trilemma Index report. If there's one thing about this this tool of the trilemma, first of all, it's covering such an amazing number of countries, but it is also engaging all the stakeholders in a formulation of an energy policy as to how can they find the balance between the different axes which are put forward in a trilemma, whether it's equity, whether it's security of supply or environmental sustainability, including also the issue of the political and regulatory context in which a policy is being pursued. And so it is really a tool for stimulating a dialogue at national level. It also enables everyone to place their country in a wider regional or global context to compare performance on these different indices between countries and regions. But for the last 2 years, we've also been able to create indices which allow us comparison over time. So we can see what progress has been made, and Martin has eloquently described some of the progress which has been made by individual countries. Now, this is a tool which is dependent on a lot of data being standardized across 128 countries. It needs continuous improvement to reflect the progress of the energy economy behind the statistics. But it also needs to look forward and anticipate what are the obvious consequences of the energy transition, as well, of course, as the new challenges related to such things as the pandemic we're in at the moment. Francois, I won't go on much longer than that in this this introduction. It's clear that the trilemma is looking backwards at what has happened so far and is tracking progress. So we can't expect it to give us new messages on the impact of COVID until we see that coming through in next year's statistics. But I repeat what I said at the beginning. This is a tool which allows all stakeholders in a country, in the region, and in the world as a whole to compare and contrast and to see what is the actual balance which must be achieved between these different axes in the trilemma. One thing about the trilemma is, for those involved in energy policy, you can't escape from it. There's no way out. You've got to find a solution which balances these factors.
Thank you very much indeed, Philip, for your opening comments there. Javiera, over to you. What are your thoughts on this in terms of what countries can learn from each other and maybe some examples that you've got from Chile?
Sure. I think that trilemma is one of the best tools to work and in collaboration. I think when we can build collaboration for more competitive markets. For example, Latin America is really rich in renewable energies. And if we work in terms of integration, collaboration, and complementation, it will make possible to attract more investment. And that obviously will increase employment and accelerate now a green recovery. Although Trilemma looks back, I think this can make us look and push forward. One clear example is that we are leading an initiative with Colombia, Costa Rica, that is called RELAC, that put as a goal as a region to have a 70% of renewables to 2030. So we're working together, and I think we're learning from each other. And I think that what you cannot measure doesn't exist. So the trilemma is that tool that can make us compare with the worldwide community. As Philip says there are 97 countries we can compare with each other. So you can verify with specific data where are you failing or where you can improve your policies. And I think it also shows the diversity of energy sources. So the policy players can make more informed decisions. So I think the comparisons that Trilemma give us is an incentive to make better decisions and faster decisions.
Thank you very much, Javiera. I mean, it's certainly, I mean, the themes of measurement that you talk about, the themes of sort of that diversity of policy and seeing what other countries are doing, I think is very informative to others. Abu, what are your thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Francois. The Trilemma Index is a scheme that I see extremely useful for countries like my own with huge population, and yet our energy supply level is very poor. And out of the 128 countries, I've scanned through this course. I've gone through this course 2 or 3 times, and I'm optimistic that if my Nigeria picks some countries and follows their footpath, we are going to see significant improvement. The ones that Martin showed, Nigeria and Chile is one. We have one score, one dimension, the same score, but there are 2 dimensions who are very low compared to Chile. I also looked at, within the Africa zone, I saw the score of our West African country, Ghana, having much higher scores than us. And I saw that they are very active very forthcoming in the aspect of energy equity and to a certain extent energy security as well. And if we follow their own example, we are likely to make significant leap forward. On the other hand, in terms of oil-rich countries, again, I have seen the score of United Arab Emirates. Their policy in terms of energy utilization plan is similar to ours. And so I had already talked to some of my colleagues that are involved in energy planning in Nigeria to look at those parameters, those dimensions of these three countries that I mentioned. And it is hoped that at the end of it all, we'll take as many as possible. Of course, you know, the countries are not the same. Microeconomic situations are not the same. So those aspects that we can take, we take. Those who have to modify to fit our own social economy, we will do just that.
Yeah, no, I think every country has got that unique context, but I hope that we can create some healthy competition between Nigeria and Ghana through the index. Martin, this is something that you've been living with and working on for quite a while. What are your perspectives in terms of, you know, how we can sort of, you know, leverage the Trilemma tool to learn?
I think one of the key strengths of the Trilemma is it gives you a common framework in which you can make the comparisons with the different countries. So you can look at the ranks, you can look at the scores, you can look at those overall and by dimension, and you can then start trying to understand what's going on and having a conversation about, you know, what is changing and why is it changing. And that then helps, I think, prioritize those areas that need to change. As Abu has highlighted, Nigeria is quite clearly, you can see there's stuff that needs to be done on energy equity. And then they can use the Trilemma to understand who are the comparable countries, what's the context, are there policies there that can be deployed in the same way? And that's where I think the real strength of it comes down, because you can understand more about your own system, but then try and understand about the context from the other countries and how they might have policies that may be more useful and more applicable.
Yes, and fascinating to hear from Javiera in terms of how countries coming together to actually address the problem as well, not just individually. Look, thank you very much, all of you, for those opening thoughts and perspectives. Let's just kind of move on. And Philip, I'm going to come to you first. Where do you think the Trilemma can be most useful as a sort of policy pathfinder tool?
Well, I think all members of the panel have emphasized this, that it creates a transparent common framework which is comprehensive, involving all the factors which could be taken into account in formulating an energy policy. And it doesn't allow one stakeholder to concentrate on one particular element alone without taking into account other elements. You can say, for example, that on security of supply, most oil-rich or gas-rich countries have a very good security of supply. But in the longer term, they've got a problem of an environmental challenge. They've got a problem too of the extent to which the benefits of those minerals are being shared in their own societies. So they have an equity problem, an accessibility problem, an affordability problem. In the end, what we're talking about here in the Trilemma is what many people talked about yesterday in the sessions. We're talking about fundamentally sustainability and resilience in its wider sense. Sustainability socially, can you base an energy policy without the benefits being shared by everyone? Can we create an energy policy which actually allows our industries and services to be competitive? Can we ensure that the systems, the networks, guarantee everyone a secure supply and reliable source of supply of energy in the face of shocks? And those are the questions, the regular questions which are asked and discussed in all our societies. I think the as we've mentioned before, this capacity to compare and contrast a national experience, but also to look at the progress made in individual countries is extremely valuable. And in a context of energy transition, where we know that we're talking about a complete transformation of the sector, whether for decarbonization or because of digitalization, because of the greater emphasis on demand management as well as supply management, whether it's a question of dealing with deciding on centralized or decentralized sources of energy. These issues are constantly being monitored within this Trilemma Index.
Thank you, Philip. So if we just, Javiera, we come to you, and we sort of talk about Chile. I mean, how is Chile looking to use sort of the Trilemma tool as a policy finding vehicle?
Many ways. As we saw, our lower scores or in security and sustainability, and when we see our future plans, we are kind of relieved because we're moving in the right direction to achieve better goals in those two indicators. I think COVID has highlighted the fragility of our economies, of our health, and above all, show us the magnitude of the climate change. And I think the energy sector, especially as we think it in Chile, will be the heart of the economic recovery and will be the heart of the fight of the climate change. So that's why when I check our priorities in Chile, we're moving in the right direction, I think. We are driving to renewables. In the last decade, we have achieved cross-cutting agreements that balance the progress in energy security, developing more diverse and independent metrics, that it's one of our main problems. Today, 95% of the projects under construction in Chile are in renewable energy. And we have also in sustainability, we have succeeded advancing 5 years in our metrics based in renewables, and our goal to be 70% renewables have moved from 2050 to 2030. So we can see that we're moving faster than we thought we were going to move. So that's really like reconforting that we're moving in the right way. We also have a compromise to be carbon neutral by 2050 and a coal phase out plan by 2040 that will be 1/3 close by 2024. So we have like really clear plan, ambitious plans, and the resolution of the Trilemma allows us to increase that ambition and visualize Chile even as an exporter of renewable energy during this decade, fostering policies and strategies to achieve it. Like we're developing a green hydrogen strategy. We are developing a flexibility strategy. So I think all the actions that we're taking are in the right direction, and we can compare it with the Trilemma and say, yes, that's the things that we need to do, and we're doing it. So I think it's a great tool to find our path to improve our index.
Javiera, thank you very, very much indeed. Abu, I'm going to move over to you. I mean, we heard about how the tool there is clearly being used as a way of driving energy policy, particularly in certain areas like sustainability. In an oil-rich country like Nigeria, it poses its own challenges. How are you looking to use the Trilemma tool in helping you shape energy policy going forward?
Thank you very much for this very important question. What I am thinking is similar to what I did about 10 years ago. when WEC was pushing energy efficiency. So now I am thinking of organizing another workshop for Nigerian energy community. Of course, I'm sure you know, with 200 million people and with very poor energy services, I think the better way to do is to present this trilemma report in full details in 2 or 3 days, so that at the end of the day, all the major energy planning professionals will be carried along to utilize the provisions of the trilemma to improve the 3-dimension score for Nigeria. In fact, as of right now, due to the pandemic, the Nigerian economy, which relies heavily for income from sale of oil for its capital and recurrent needs, was at the verge of recession. Everything has frozen to standstill, and the government is very, very disturbed. And 2 projects that were in the limbo were quickly commissioned. And the first one was what is called the Siemens Roadmap for Power. Siemens, the German energy company, is going to help us to move our electricity level from a little less than 5,000 megawatts to 25,000 megawatts by year 2025. And the second project was the Abuja-Kano-Kaduna gas pipeline, the 650 kilometers to take gas from Niger Delta, northern part of the country, and then to form the first leg of the North African gas pipeline that will take gas from Nigeria to Niger and to Algeria, and subsequently to sell the gas to Europe. So that these 2 projects are part of the scheme of the government to ensure that significant electricity is generated. And that came because calls to the government that government can no longer rely on sale of oil for its income, and that the government has to diversify. So government noted the major requirement for diversification of the source of income of the country is 24/7 electricity. And that's why the government is jolted. The gas pipeline will enable gas power stations to be built, many of them, along with other aspects for food security because of protection of fertilizer. I think we are moving in the right direction. And I think I'm going to promote the Trilemma report significantly to improve the lot of my own country.
That's very, very encouraging, and it's certainly a challenge for many countries which are endowed with sort of fossil fuel resources to make that transition to some extent, but also the issues of equity, as you point out, because I mean there is still what I think is something in the order of about 800 million people who don't have access to power and who, by definition, are effectively excluded from the global economy in many ways as a result of that. Martin, I mean, how do you think the dilemma, the trilemma, not the dilemma, how do you think the trilemma is going to be looking to develop and evolve, in support of the sorts of agendas that we've heard from Abu and from Javiera?
I think as the energy transition moves, it means you've constantly got to keep shifting about what we're trying to measure. So the trilemma needs to continuously improve. And that can be simple things like we need to look at new data sources, but also keep refining the methodology. And as we also need to be looking about trying to improve its usefulness and its usability. So it means that we're constantly trying to improve it to capture those new aspects. Now, there are certain things like, for example, the trilemma includes information on oil stocks. That's been a historically important aspect for energy security. As we go forward, we need to have something about electricity stocks. That's not there yet. The data sources don't exist, but we need to be thinking about how we can be incorporating that in the future. But more broadly, I can see sort of 2 areas where we need to push the trilemma. The first is that with the trilemma, we've developed this conceptual framework. So we've got it at the global level. We also have country cluster level, and we can then move into national and subnational trilemma versions. Now, the country cluster is where we can use the overarching, the database for the global trilemma and actually cut it in different ways. And for this year's trilemma, for the first time, we've piloted this. We've got a couple of country groupings that we haven't used before. So we have the Mediterranean region. We're comparing the North Mediterranean with the South Mediterranean. I think there's a lot more we can do with that. And there's one that I'm particularly pleased with, the ASEAN countries in Asia. Normally, because Asia, for the council, is a bigger region, ASEAN are a smaller group, but that means we're able to sort of pull those out. And I think then we can start exploring those groups. There are new geographies that we can explore, slightly different ways. We can cut that data in other ways as well. For example, GDP would be one way that you could cut it. But you can also maybe look, for example, at landlocked countries, those oil producers. We can slice and dice the data in different ways to see if there are new insights that we can pull out. And we intend to pull out some articles on this before the next trilemma. So we want to try and pull some things out of that. But the second area that I'm really keen for us to do with the trilemma is to use it in conjunction with the Council's other insights tools. For example, our issues monitor and our world energy scenarios. Now, our issues monitor, which is almost like the pulse take for energy leaders to understand what are the key priorities. I think there's an interesting bit of analysis we could do comparing the trilemma, which is, as we've said, it's a retrospective look. How does that compare with what's coming up with the issues monitor? Is there an overlap? Does that hint at where we should be, maybe countries should be adjusting where their policy priorities are? The other area where we've done a little bit of work on, but I want to do so much more, is actually with our world energy scenarios. Now, at Congress last year, we did have, for our ministerial session, we did have a little game with the ministers where we had the trilemma and we had scenarios dice, where we basically were saying about this is the trilemma for a region. Can you guess which region it is? And then under the different scenarios, the three different scenarios, we have the world energy scenarios to say, okay, given this, what's going to be your policy priority? I think that sort of using of trilemma in conjunction with scenarios helps us thinking more about policy pathfinding and trying to explore. We can't control the future, but we can plan for different futures. And that's what our scenario is about. It's whether there's going to be some there's more collaborative or less collaborative. Energy policies need to be robust to those different types. And I think using the trilemma in conjunction with scenarios allows us to game that, allows us to play around with that and explore, really make the trilemma into a true policy pathfinding tool.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. And so, I mean, I'm going to come back to Javiera and to Abu. I mean, if we look at, the scenario work that Martin's talking about, you look at the interplay between the scenarios and the trilemma tool. I mean, the pandemic has had huge impacts globally, not just in terms of health, but clearly in terms of economics. But it's also changed fundamental working habits in terms of how we work, how we think about mobility has changed, and that's had huge impacts on energy demand levels over the course of the first 6 months of this year, and people are projecting that this could go on for a little while. So I'm just wondering, I mean, first of all, maybe Javiera, from a Chile perspective, I mean, how's the pandemic shifted the thinking about energy policy in Chile and maybe the region more broadly?
I think, Francois, as I told you before, that driving to renewables in a more faster way is one of the things that will help us to recover, to have more employment. And we also think that a key factor is energy efficiency. I think that the best energy is the one that you don't use. So that's why energy efficiency is so important. It can aid to reduce emissions about 30 or 40%. And there's a tremendous potential in public investment that requires, for example, construction, labor, and that all impacts the employment and obviously the recovery. And I think new sources of energy and innovation will also play a key role. For example, we are, as I told you before, for us, hydrogen is now a key topic that we are developing, and hydrogen can be a key vector for build a new economy that will build a new world of work, jobs, and investment. That's the word I was trying to say. So I think energy efficiency is the key for that, and will help us to have better access to energy, more sustainability, and developing new technologies will help us to have more flexibility to allow those new energies that are kind of and give them stability and security for access, for a more clean access of energy. Because, for example, in Chile, we have a good access, but there are some energies that are really, really, that contaminate a lot. So we have to balance that as well.
Thank you. And Abu, from a Nigerian perspective, which dimension of the trilemma is going to be most impacted, in terms of future policy as a result of, the pandemic that we've lived through?
Actually, all the three dimensions will be impacted. I say this because the pandemic has created fears, real fears, in the government officials and even those in the private sector dealing with energy. So a lot of discussions have been going on, and from what I gather is that Nigerians want all the three dimensions to be attended to. In the case of energy security, there has been calls for ensuring that all the viable supply options for electricity generation should be actually utilized. Again, there is the issue of interconnections, like I mentioned, the one of gas. There's also the call increasingly that if we tidy up interconnections with neighboring countries, Nigeria is at the edge of West Africa, and Central Africa, our neighboring country of Cameroon. So there is this interlink between the Central African and West African gas power pools. And if they are sorted out, whenever there is a lull in electricity supply, we can rely on the interconnections. Then on the issue of access, that is the one that is receiving most calls from Nigerians, because Nigerians realize that the level of electricity is too poor, while other countries, like I said, Ghana is having about 84%. And if you move to Tunisia, it's 100%. Mauritius is also 100% access. So many Nigerians are saying, why can we not improve significantly? Because we have all the resources. We have oil and gas. We have plenty of renewable energy, solar, wind, biomass. And then Nigerians also are calling for the use of nuclear power, because we have uranium deposit in many states of Nigeria, neighboring Niger Republic. And Niger Republic is active in mining of uranium. Nigerians are calling, why not nuclear power? Because it's beautiful provider of base load electricity with no carbon dioxide emission. And then on the issue of, access, again, the issue of cost of electricity, fuel and gas is an area that is creating a lot of problem. Recently, Nigerian government increased tariff, and there's a lot of demonstration. Government had to pipe down. So if that is attended to, also it will improve our security scope. Then the issue of environmental sustainability of energy systems, again, like I just mentioned, there is call for more utilization of renewable energy, so that carbon footprints of energy supply will be low. Again, this issue of entrenchment of energy efficiency. Of course, like I mentioned earlier today, we had a project with ECOWAS and Cuba And in so many housing estates that we did the project, we got savings in electricity consumption, electricity demand of up to 40%, which can be used now to serve unserved communities. So that's why I said the three major dimensions of security, equity, and sustainability, all of them, we have to attend to them. And that's where Nigerians are calling the government to ensure that that is done.
Yes. Well, I think, Abu, there is a lot of work for all of us to do, including you, I think, on this. Let's just, we've got a lot of questions that are coming in from the audience at the moment. So I just want to sort of start picking some of the audience questions as well. Philip, I may come to you on this first one. Are there thoughts from the panelists on how effective the role of incentives are in impacting a country's performance across the trilemma dimensions? So the role of incentives, how important are they, do you think, in helping a country to progress against the dimensions?
To answer that specific question straight off, clearly, if an incentive in terms of tax or subsidy can influence either consumers or producers to do something which is going to get us nearer to an objective, for example, of CO2 emission reduction or of energy efficiency, is in principle a good thing. On the other hand, if it is permanent as an incentive, then instead of actually changing, accelerating change, it may actually embed behavior in a way which is not good for competition and not good for for innovation in a sector. We've seen the positive effect of incentives for renewables in Europe, in Asia, in the US as well. At the same time, we've seen the consequences of continuing to give incentives which are no longer necessary because the technologies themselves have proved to be quite competitive without subsidy. And therefore there should have been a diversion of that subsidy to other areas where we need to stimulate innovation. So I think that it's a mixed story, but on the whole, the answer is yes, they are needed to stimulate change. I saw some other questions from the audience about security of supply, for example, in the Trilemma Index. Clearly, 10 years ago, maybe we only looked at indigenous resources and things like oil stocks. Now we're having to assess security of supply on the basis of this sustainability of an energy system, not just indigenous resources, but availability of a range of sources of energy, and also availability of a range of sources of energy at a competitive price, which depends, of course, on the markets themselves being open. You can subsidize oil or gas in oil and gas-rich countries, but that may result simply in a more uncompetitive economy. Just answering those two questions, hopefully, Francois. I think that coming back to the issue of the pandemic, there are positive aspects and more worrying aspects. As you mentioned yourself, the pandemic has changed behaviors, changed the location of our work, is actually accelerated digitalization in our societies. That's changing the energy mix which we're using. So our energy transition needs to take into account these factors. We put a lot of emphasis a year ago in most energy transition plans on move towards public transport. But collective transport at the moment has the challenge of dealing with the safety and security issues during a pandemic. Therefore, we've got to reassess that integration of energy in wider transport, mobility policies in order to say, well, okay, how do we guarantee that security of personal security for everyone, but nevertheless meet our emission goals and meet our anti-pollution goals? And that's one aspect of reassessment of any trilemma balance in the light of the pandemic.
Thank you, Philip. I'm curious to get your perspective, both Abu and Javiera, just around the role of incentives in Chile and in Nigeria. Let's start with Chile first, and then we'll go to Nigeria.
We are a country that have been used to not use incentives. We think that the private sector, we can do the policies and try to do them the best way so we can foster the investments. But now, for example, we are trying to foster like solar panels in houses that has some incentives, and also in pilots in hydrogen projects. So in those topics that we think that we can make a real change, there will be some incentives, but also with the participation of the private sector, not just the public sector.
Absolutely. Abu, what about in Nigeria? Role of incentives in terms of, energy mix and trilemma dimensions?
Yes, definitely we see incentives could be necessary in a number of situations. And as a result of the pandemic, there have been discussions that many are pointing out that where there's a big change in electricity supply, then and leading to loss of jobs and so on and so forth, then that could call for the government to do something like palliatives. And more importantly, when you are talking of energy transition to low carbon technologies, definitely it is going to call of some loss of jobs. And this social impact can best be mitigated, even if it is for a temporary basis, with some kind of incentivization schemes. Pending the time the new technologies create adequate number of jobs to cater for those sacked from their previous establishments. Then, of course, again, when you touching the change in choices of people in terms of energy options, again, that could be a source of worry, cause of problem. And the humanization aspect of it is that some kind of palliative should be given. So in short, I would say incentives could be needed to bring in new technologies, new energy technologies. But like I had from a fellow panelist, that incentives should not be permanent. If it is permanent, then it will defeat the purpose. A transition period, when the new systems get fully established, by that time, the incentives can be withdrawn.
Thank you, Abu. There's another very interesting question that's come in, which is, what are the types of indicators that can capture the transition of jobs that will be needed? Can this be captured and compared globally? I'm going to come to you, Martin, in a second, because I think we talk about incentives in terms of financial incentives and financial capital to some extent to accelerate things. I mean, this is about human capital. And how will countries develop the human capital required to help them transition across these dimensions? Any thoughts, Martin, in terms of how the index could do that, is doing that?
We need to do more on the index so that we actually make it capture humanizing energy. It's got some of the elements there, but we need to do more. There are two aspects I would sort of pull out. In one, that we have a global metric, and trying to capture some of this information to try and get that information for the 130 odd countries that we look at is challenging. So then it takes down to a different route where I think it does become more relevant. And it's the fact that we have the trilemma as this conceptual framework And I highlighted previously, we've got the global part, we've got the country clusters part. The two bits we haven't done too much on thus far are the national pilots and the city level, the subnational. Now, the work that we were doing with some of our member committees got delayed because of the pandemic, but I think that's an area where we can again start up for the national pilots, because the trilemma as a global metric has to try to put all countries on a comparable basis. Now that means there are some things that at a global level don't make much sense for individual countries. Now a simple one is if we look at energy equity. It's a very simple metric in UN SDG 7, access, yes or no. That doesn't really touch quality energy access, but usable amounts of energy. We've started addressing that a little bit in the trilemma. We need to go further with it. When we start looking at a national pilot, we can start looking at concepts like fuel poverty. Now that's very much an OECD type thought process, but it's relevant it's relevant for all really, because you can then we can brigade the amounts of electricity that different parts of the communities have. At a national level, you can start exploring that. And then also, for example, seeing about these things like the types of jobs, maybe the shift in employment type, whether you're shifting, for example, in an oil producing country from having petrochemical engineers to maybe employing those with solar panel fitters, which might have less economic value to the country. There's a conversation that needs to be explored there. Now, the other aspect that I'd like to touch on is going the subnational level, because that's where I think we can start looking at more the bottom-up process, particularly at city level, and that's where we start maybe looking at instead of at quantitative data, more at qualitative data. And I think there we can make more of a comparison. It's something we've begun to think about. And ideally, I'd like to be able to have something that we can show in prototype at the next Congress, at the trilemma, at the different levels.
That would be interesting to go down to, as you say, down to those regional city levels that you're talking about there. Javiera, I know you've got some thoughts and ideas around, I think, sort of the people side of the human capital side.
Yes, and it's mixed with incentives. I remember that later. I think we have forgotten to say that we have to face the main problem, which is the basis of everything, which it's to put the people in the center. So this means, for example, fighting energy poverty. For example, in Chile, we have 50% of the Chilean population is exposed to air pollution, or 20% of the energy supplies is still wood or biomass. That means that 2 million families are exposed to intra-domiciliary contamination. And for example, in winter, the poor families live under 6.5 Celsius below the range of comfort. So even though we have a lot of access, we need to see another aspect of the energy poverty. And that's why this year we launched a transition plan that stimulates the use of clean energy through a preferential electric heating and cooling tariff plan that implies, as I said, a preferential tariff, a replacement of heating and cooling equipment, and improving the thermal insulation of homes. So we're not just facing how people access energy, so which kind of energy they are accessing. So the objective is to reach affordable energy, but clean energy. And that's what Philip said, that it's really focusing on SDG 7, that the energy access must be like of quality, maintaining the comfort of people, improving health in the case of Chile, and also taking care of their budget. It's just not what have access to energy, but what kind of energy you are you're having, and that implies obviously humanizing this transition.
Thank you, Javiera. Well, look, it's been a fascinating discussion. We've had the opportunity to talk about both human capital and financial capital. We've talked about incentives. I think both Abu and Javiera, you made it very clear how the Trilemma tool is a tool that's only helping you to prioritize around investment policy and investment choices around the energy space. And it also seems like, Martin, there's plenty of work for you to do as you build in sort of the humanizing human capital aspects of the energy transition and the challenges associated with the trilemma within that, as well as actually, as you were talking about or touching on, what we can do at cities and regional level. I'd just like to thank all of you for a fascinating conversation and for your perspectives on this. And it seems as though there's a lot more for us to do, both with the Trilemma tool and in shaping and improving the energy policies in our respective countries. I'd like to thank you all very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello there, and I'm delighted to be back with you. I'm Etna Trainer. Thank you so much for joining us. And what a tremendous discussion, a lively discussion, a future-focused discussion, a really in-depth discussion on the energy trilemma. Really, really fascinating in terms of the opportunities that are there. So I'm delighted to be back with you before we close off the evening. And Arthur is around somewhere.
I'm here.
There you are, Arthur. In fact, and you're in the studio. How lovely. Here we are. We're going to get known on the circuit as the dynamic duo, I think, in the energy circuit, you and I. So it's the tag team.
Very good. Well, like you, I enjoyed that session enormously. I thought it was very, very interesting.
It really was. Give me your takeaways, because I mean, there's so much going on here, and I think there was also tremendous excitement about it, and just the opportunities and the potential that it can actually deliver.
No, I agree, and I think the first thing I'd like to say really to everyone is congratulations, because this is the 10th year that the Trilemma has come out. It's an enormous body of work. Some of us who've been in the industry for perhaps too long have used the Trilemma year after year, and the fact that they're celebrating the 10-year is fantastic. I think the other aspect I got out, there was insight. You know, there's insight in the context of those organizations that are not organizations, those countries that are moving against all three dimensions. Not massively surprising that you got the OECD dominated countries on that. But what I did find interesting was the access to energy and the improvement over the last 10 years. You know, it was kind of on slide 2 that we got to that when Martin was giving the presentation. I thought that was fantastic. You know, fantastic as in one of the things we've talked about here is the importance of access and how that needs to basically be, you know, one of the principles that we think about. So it's great to see the progress of that. I think the other aspect, as an ex-consultant, doing what you think is great bodies of work, is the challenge sometimes is that everyone says yes, fantastic, and it just gathers dust. And what was really good was to hear both Chile and Nigeria talking about the leverage that they want to use the Trilemma for, the leverage of connecting with other countries. We heard, you know, Abu from Nigeria talking about he's looking in on Ghana, he's looking in on other countries, he's looking on the UAE, and are there things that they can learn? Yes, they're different countries, different starting points, but there are learning. So it was great just to hear that, yes, it was intellectually interesting to look at it, but they were going to leverage the Trilemma as we go forward. And I think the other...
Arthur, one other thing, sorry. Arthur, if I may. I actually also found, in listening to everybody talking about it, and we're beginning to hear this, I think, is the, you know, the urgency that's there, and, you know, people really beginning, I think, to believe that they have to move much quicker, that speed is essential in this game. Yeah,
no, I would agree. I think that urgency, I think that's the word I had, focus and acceleration were the two words that I use. You know, COVID-19, the pandemic, is focusing the attention of governments, of policymakers, but focusing it in the context of energy transition and how can we accelerate our move to a different energy system. And I think the other aspect that Javiera brought through, which I think is really important in terms of humanizing energy and the major theme of World Energy Week, was her point about we need to put people in the middle of this. You can't think of the trilemma in isolation. You've got to think about its impact on the people of the country and still the challenges that countries face in terms of giving access, giving security, giving affordable energy to all. So I did think that was interesting as well.
Absolutely, and I think it all comes back, and I'm sure Angela Wilkinson is sitting here, listening to all of this, reiterating and really proving her big focus on, humanizing the whole energy debate, because it all comes back to this, and it really does. And we look at the fact that in so many countries in Africa, we're talking about 60% not having access right now. And I remember once in a conversation with a minister, and there was a bit of pride almost that that's the focus they were looking for. And I thought, well, wait a minute, 60% is just a little bit over 50. And who tells the other 40% that this is it? There is no hope. So, we really need to be moving to make sure that that energy inclusion is here for everybody, because ultimately, and I think as you would agree to, it's all about economic progress for the world. It's not just for these countries. You bring new populations into, the energy equation, and energy will shift a whole lot of their problems, of health problems, life problems, education problems. I mean, whole economic growth. It just changes people's lives, really.
No, I agree. And I think, linked to that is also the recognition that perhaps you can't deal with a lot of those issues on your own. It was actually good to hear that there were collaborations, with Chile, with Colombia, and I think Costa Rica that she mentioned, also Nigeria, talking about the importance of linking to other countries. So the challenges that these countries face, by using the access to data in the trilemma, gives them, I think, a point of connection with other countries to actually think about the ways in which they can share limited resources or knowledge or insight so that it benefits their energy system in the way that it contributes to society across all of those broad agendas that you mentioned.
It does. And I think, hopefully this will speed things up. People want it to be sped up a little bit. So it'll make a big difference to so many people's lives.